Everyone knows that when you turn a book into a TV show or movie, the product is never quite the same. Stay tuned for some of the most shocking differences between the books and the show ever. If you're a huge movie buff, make sure you check out our sister channel, Screen Rant, and subscribe for new videos. Now, on to 10 differences between Shadowhunters books and TV show. The characters. If you are a die-hard fan of the Mortal Instruments series, then you have probably noticed some serious differences between the books and the show Shadowhunters. To get things started, let's talk about the most basic difference, the characters. Almost all of them are at least a little bit different from their literacy counterparts. Take Luke, for instance. In the books, Luke lived on top of a bookshop and lived a super quiet life. In the show, he is a police officer whose life is nowhere near as quiet. In the books, Maureen isn't introduced until City of Fallen Angels. But in the series, she appears in the very first episode and is said to be one of Clary and Simon's friends, which wasn't the case in the book. And don't make us start talking about Lydia Branwell. She's not even in the books. She was just added to the show to lead Alec into having a relationship with Magnus. And if you really want to get down to details, all of the characters on the show are a lot older than they were in the books. Clary was supposed to be almost 16 when she first met Jace. Isabel and Jace were also 16. But in the show, Alec is 23 and the rest of the cast is around the same age. Scenes. It's not just the characters that are way different in the show than they are in the books. Some of the scenes are different as well. Take how Alec felt when he had to marry Lydia Branwell in the show. This never happened in the books. Alec was never supposed to marry anyone in the books, and the relationship between Isabel and Raphael that turned up in season 2 did not happen like that at all. But we like them together, so we aren't too upset about it. All of the scenes with Madsy are different from the way things went in the books. Even though we like some of the changes that they made before bringing the characters to life, it's kind of strange to see the storylines veer, especially if you are a super fan like we are. We thought we would know how everything would turn out after reading the books, but that is not the case at all. How did the changes in the scenes make you feel? Are you screaming at the television, or are you happy with the changes? Make sure to let us know your feelings in the comments. Clary. Okay, so we know that Clary is the main character and everything, but did you like her in the books? A lot of readers had issues with her because of how she acted towards other female characters. In the books, she doesn't really get along with Izzy, and that would normally be fine, but it seems like the reason they didn't get along was that Clary was jealous. In the TV show, their relationship is quite different. The two seem to be friends from the start. Clary is also a lot closer to her mom on the show than she was in the books as well. It could be due to the fact that TV Clary is older than book Clary and probably appreciates her mom a bit more than book Clary. In the show, Clary also has a lot more going for her than in the books. At the beginning of the show, she's accepted into an advanced program at the Brooklyn Academy of Art. Talk about ambition. Again, this difference possibly occurs due to her age. At 15, it probably would be a little hard for Clary to be accepted into such a prestigious program. Which do you like better, the book version of Clary or the TV Clary? Simon. Poor Simon. He showed up a lot more in the books than he did on the TV show. In the books, he was a geeky mortal for quite a while. It wasn't until the second book that he transformed into a vampire and was sired by Raphael. So we got to know his character a lot better. On the television show, he was transformed in the first season, and it wasn't even at the end of the season either. It was in episode 3. On the show, Camille, who was a vampire, let Simon bite her while they were making out. A lot of people who were fans of the books were super mad about this diversion. Why? Because having Simon change so early meant that so many other things in the books would have to change. So much will have to be cut out because Simon is already a vampire. So if you were looking forward to seeing any of Simon's non-vampire moments on screen, then you are not going to be a happy camper. But this does mean that we are going to get to see a lot more of vampire Simon than we did in the books. And who knows, maybe we'll like it this way better. Jobs. Watching the Shadowhunters show is like playing a game of Clue to figure out what they changed from the books and what they added in. If you read the books and now watch the show, you will notice that there is a huge difference in the jobs of a lot of the characters. In the books, Clary's mom, Jocelyn, is an artist, but you may have forgotten this because in the show, she owns an antique store. They may have done this because they wanted Clary's mom to look like she had a more stable job, though we are not 100% certain why this change occurred. As we mentioned before, Luke Garraway owned a bookstore in the books. which made sense because it matched his sort of meek personality. But in the show, he is an officer with the NYPD. This wouldn't have made sense in the books, but somehow on the show, it makes perfect sense. Another weird thing is that on the show, Simon is an accounting student, which isn't exactly a profession, but in the books, he is a high school student. We wonder what the reason for all these switches was. Were the television writers just bored and wanting to shake things up a bit? Glamouring. Okay, so changing ages and small things about characters makes sense sometimes. After all, the show couldn't be half as sultry as it is if all the characters were actually 16 on the show. That would just be creepy. But when the writers change a whole storyline, that's when it can get a bit too much. One time that occurred was in episode 10 of the television show. When the truth about Michael Wayland was exposed, Jace recognized him as his father immediately. This was because Valentine had glamoured himself to look like Michael. But in the books, this whole reveal went a bit differently. In the written series, Valentine didn't change his appearance to look like Michael. He only took on Michael's name and identity, which caused Jace not to instantly recognize him. Maybe they were running out of time on the show and it needed to speed up the process. Or maybe it's a bit harder to show things that are described in books, whereas in the book, they could describe how Jace slowly began to recognize Michael, but in the show, that's a little bit harder to portray. This version was probably much easier for an audience to digest. Jace and Valentine's relationship. Every relationship is different. From friendships to romantic relationships, it all comes down to how both people feel about one another. Some relationships on the show are quite different from the ones in the books. Which relationship are we talking about in particular? The one between Jace and Valentine. In the books, Jace thinks about teaming up with Valentine and working with him. Although he thinks about it, he never really voices these intentions. He also never actually does team up with Valentine. On the television show, that is not the case. At the end of season 1, Jace does decide to team up with Valentine. Granted, there was some coercion involved with that decision, but at the end of the day, Jace does work with Valentine, which makes us wonder how this will cause the future of the show to differ from the book. It's kind of like a chain of events. One change causes 1,000 others. Will this difference completely change the way that Jace's future goes on the show? It definitely has the potential to cause some big waves. Such a big partnership cannot happen without repercussions. We guess we will have to stay tuned to find out how everything shakes out in the end. The Mortal Cup. If you were just watching Shadowhunters and hadn't read the books, you might not have any problems with the storyline. But for those of us who are diehard fans of the books, we have more than a few issues. One, for instance, is the fact that the Mortal Cup has a completely different use in the series than it did in the books. Granted, the Mortal Cup is pretty important in both versions. On the show, they say that if a human has a drink from the cup, they will die, which is really strange because in the book, if a human drinks from the cup, they will transform into a Shadowhunter. It also is a lot more valuable in the show than it was in the books. In the show, lots of downworlders want the cup, but in the book, only a few people wanted it. Another thing that was different on the show was the number of times that Clary used the cup. In the book, Clary never used the cup to control any demons. On the TV show, she does it quite often. Clary's use of the cup does make the show a bit more interesting to watch, so we can see why the show's creators would change the script like that. Jocelyn. So, in the show, Jocelyn gave Clary a steal at the beginning of the show, which was strange because in the books, Jocelyn would have never have done that. Jocelyn didn't want Clary to know anything about the Shadow World, so her giving Clary the steal makes no sense whatsoever. She was always super careful to make sure that Clary wasn't exposed to anything supernatural. In fact, she was so concerned with Clary never finding out about the magical elements of the world that she went to Magnus to have him get rid of Clary's memories so that she wouldn't remember anything about the Shadow World. So her giving her this steal actually goes against everything she has done in the past. The show also had Jocelyn pass away for some reason. In the books, Jocelyn never passed away, so it was weird when the show would make up such a huge thing. And it didn't even really matter to the storyline. It's like the writers just got bored and were like, who can we get rid of today? And for some reason, that person was Jocelyn. Lots of fans of the books had a big problem with the way the show handled Jocelyn, but the creators of the show must have had a reason for doing it. More about the characters. Okay, we don't know about you, but when we read the books, we like to pay close attention to the details, especially when the author is describing the characters. It's the first time you get a feel for who the characters are, and it's the only time you get to create images of them in your head. When the show creators read through the books, they must have not paid too close attention to the details of the characters, or maybe they didn't read the books at all. If they would have known that Ragnar Fell was supposed to be green. In the show, he is not green at all. but just a regular human tone. In the books, Katarina is supposed to be blue. If you've watched the show, then you know that that isn't the case on Shadowhunters. Of course, these are minor changes that don't really affect the storyline at all, but it's still annoying. Would it have made such a difference if the show's creators had stuck to the storyline? No, it wouldn't have. It just would have made fans of the book a lot more happy, right? Do you hear that, producers? It's not too late. Your fans will thank you. And that's it for 10 differences between Shadowhunters books and TV show. Did we miss any of the differences? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out our sister channel, Screen Rant. Thanks for watching.